She couldn't feel her hands anymore. Not from the cold. From the rope. 6 days. 6 days in a room that smelled like concrete and silence and something she refused to name. 6 days of footsteps outside her door and voices that decided things about her life in a language she didn't understand. 6 days of being Ella Lambert, the woman who had closed $11 billion deals, who had never once walked into a room and lost, and feeling like absolutely none of that mattered anymore. Her wrists were raw. Her left ankle had swollen to twice its size from the fall on day 2. Her silk blouse, the expensive one, the one she'd chosen specifically because it made her look untouchable, was torn at the shoulder and filthy in ways she had stopped looking at. But her eyes were still sharp. That was the thing about Ella. You could take everything from her. The comfort, the control, the carefully constructed life. But her mind, that was the last thing to go. And it hadn't gone yet. She had been counting the step of patterns. The guard on the east corridor took exactly 43 steps between his rounds. The one near the stairwell, the younger one, the nervous one. He always paused at the same spot. Every single night. By clockwork. Tonight the pattern broke. Shouting. Somewhere deep in the building. Then more voices. Then silence. The kind of silence that felt like a held breath. And then the door at the end of the corridor. Open. Just slightly. Just enough. Ella's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she was certain someone would hear it. This was either her only chance, or it was a trap. She didn't have the luxury of deciding which. Ran, barefoot, down back alleys that cut her feet open on cold stone, through streets lit by signs she couldn't read, past faces that stared and looked away. The city swallowed her whole, enormous and indifferent and beautiful in the most terrifying way. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she could not stop. And then glass doors. Light. Warmth. She hit them with her shoulder and crashed through into a marble lobby that smelled of cedar and money and something dangerously quiet. The room froze. Every man in it turned to look at her. And then one man stepped forward. Composed. Wearing a suit that probably cost more than her first salary. He didn't reach for anything. Didn't shout. Didn't flinch. He just looked at her. And Ella, who had survived 6 days of captivity on pure calculation and nerve, felt something she had not felt in any of those 6 days. Fear of a completely different kind. Welcome to Afro-K romance fairy tale. On today's episode you get a dose of betrayal, power, romance, love, unexpected encounters and a beautiful beginning. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification icon to get a reminder when new amazing stories drop, and send this story to friends and family who you think would love to watch it. And also, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now let's dive back into this amazing story. Ella Lambert did not make mistakes. That was not arrogance. That was her entire identity, built from scratch, brick by painful brick. She grew up in Lagos, the third daughter of a schoolteacher father and a mother who pressed her uniform every morning even when there was nothing in the kitchen. They didn't have money. What they had was expectation. And Ella had carried it like a crown her whole life. By 22, she had a first-class degree in finance from the University of Lagos. By 25, she was headhunted by Meridian Capital in London, one of the most aggressive investment firms in Europe. By 28, she was their youngest senior analyst, closing deals in boardrooms full of men twice her age who underestimated her exactly once. She had a gift, not just with numbers, with people. She could read a room the way a surgeon reads a scan. She knew when someone was lying. She knew when a deal was rotten beneath its polished surface. She knew how to stay 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. Seoul was supposed to be step 1 of the biggest deal of her career. Meridian Capital was in the final stages of a merger with Kwon Industries, a South Korean conglomerate worth $11 billion. Ella had spent 4 months building the financial architecture of this deal alone. Every projection, every risk assessment, every clause. It was her masterpiece. 4 days in Seoul. Sign the papers. Fly home. Get the promotion she had been quietly promised. That was the plan. She landed on a Tuesday evening. The city greeted her with neon lights and a cool October wind, and the kind of beautiful chaos that made her chest feel strangely full. She had never been to Asia before. Everything felt new and electric and slightly overwhelming in the best possible way. Her driver met her at arrivals. Polite, quiet, held a sign with her name. She didn't notice the second car that pulled out behind them. She didn't notice when the route stopped matching the map on her phone. She didn't notice until the car turned down a street that had no lights, no people, and no way back, and the driver locked the doors without a word. By the time she understood what was happening, there were 3 men and a black hood and a voice that told her not to scream. She screamed anyway. Nobody came. 6 days. That was how long Ella Lambert sat in a room with no windows and no answers. They gave her water, occasionally food. Nobody spoke to her directly. Nobody told her who they were or what they wanted. And that, the silence, was the part that almost broke her. Because Ella could handle pain. She had handled pain her whole life. But uncertainty, unanswered questions, those were a different kind of torture. Her mind ran every scenario on a loop. Was it the merger? Had someone found out she'd flagged the anomaly in Kwan's offshore accounts? Was it her firm? Was it someone inside her own team? She had found something in those financial files 3 weeks before the trip. Discrepancy. Small enough to miss. Significant enough to matter. She had flagged it quietly, only to her direct supervisor, Daniel Osei. She trusted Daniel. He was the one who had pushed for her to lead this deal. She lay on that cold floor and told herself it wasn't him. She told herself it couldn't be him. But the question never left her. Who knew she was coming? On the 6th night something changed. The energy in the building shifted. Urgent, distracted. She heard raised voices, footsteps running. And then the impossible, a door at the end of the hall left ajar. Ella Lambert had not survived 28 years of a world that wanted to shrink her by being the kind of woman who waited. Ran. The lobby was too quiet for what it was. That was the first thing Ella noticed. Even through the panic, even through the pain radiating up her swollen ankle with every step. A place this beautiful, this deliberately designed, did not exist for ordinary business. The marble floors were the kind that absorbed sound. The lighting was low and intentional. There were no reception desks, no company logos, no signs of any kind. Just men in dark suits who had stopped everything they were doing to stare at her. And him. He hadn't moved from where he stood. Hadn't spoken. He was watching her the way someone watches a situation they are calculating. Not reacting, calculating. Like she was a variable he hadn't accounted for and he was deciding in real time exactly what to do with her. Ella straightened her spine. Every instinct she had, every boardroom survival skill, every negotiation reflex, fired at once. "I need a phone," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to call the British Embassy. Right now." Nobody moved. The man in the expensive suit tilted his head slightly. Just slightly. Like the request amused him in a way he had no intention of showing. "You're injured," he said. His English was precise. And hurried. The accent was there but it didn't soften him. It sharpened him somehow. "I'm aware," Ella said. "The phone. Sit down first." "I don't want to sit down. I want a phone." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly. More like recalibration. He looked at her for one long moment and then said something in Korean to the men around him. They moved immediately. Silently. The lobby cleared in under 30 seconds like he had simply rearranged the air. And then it was just the two of them. "My name is Jeon Siwon," he said. He didn't offer a hand. "You are in a private building. You came in through a secured entrance. That means one of two things. Either you are very lost or someone sent you here." "I escaped," Ella said. 6 days ago I was taken from an airport transfer. I've been held in a building somewhere in this city and tonight I ran. I don't know where I am. I don't know who took me. I need a phone and I need to contact the embassy and I need..." She stopped. Her ankle gave slightly. Just slightly, but he saw it. He crossed the space between them in 3 steps and caught her elbow before she processed that he had moved. His grip was firm but not rough. His hand was warm through the torn fabric of her blouse. "You need to sit down," he said again. Quieter this time. Almost like it wasn't an order anymore. Ella looked up at him. This close, she could see his face properly for the first time. Dark jaw. Dark eyes that gave absolutely nothing away. A small scar just beneath his left cheekbone. Thin, deliberate looking, like something that had been survived rather than merely healed. She sat down. Not because he told her to. Because her body had simply run out of argument. He had her ankle examined by a man who arrived with a medical bag and no questions. He had water and food brought. Real food, warm and quiet, and placed in front of her without ceremony. He sat across from her while she ate, and he watched her with that same measuring expression, and Ella watched him back because watching people was the only weapon she had left. "You're not calling the police," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. "Why?" "Because the men who took you," he said carefully, "are not men the police in this city will touch without permission. And the people who give that permission are complicated." Ella set down her chopsticks. "How do you know who took me?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. "You know them," she said slowly. "You know who they are." Siwin said nothing. And in that nothing, Ella Lambert, who had built her entire career on reading what people refused to say, understood something that made her stomach drop completely. She had not crashed into a safe place. She had crashed into a different kind of dangerous. She asked to use the bathroom. A woman was brought to escort her. Composed, professional, eyes that tracked everything. The bathroom was marble and spotless, and had a small frosted window that Ella assessed in under 4 seconds and determined was 3 floors up with nothing below it but stone. She looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back. The bruising along her jaw had deepened to purple. Her natural hair, the big, beautiful coils she spent every Sunday maintaining with the kind of devotion her mother called excessive and her friends called iconic, was matted on one side from 6 days of a concrete floor. Her eyes were exhausted in a way that sleep could not immediately fix. But they were still sharp. "Who are you, Jeon Siwon?" she thought. "And what do you know that you're not telling me?" She didn't have the answers yet. But she was going to get them. She walked back out into the room, sat down across from him again, and said the thing she had been calculating since the moment she understood where she was. "You're keeping me here," she said. "Aren't you?" Siwin looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "you saw something when you came through those doors. And the men who took you cannot know you're alive until I understand what you know." Ella felt the chill move through her slowly. "And if I refuse?" His eyes didn't waver. "Then we both have a very serious problem." 3 days. That was how long Ella Lambert lived inside the Jeon building, in a room that was nicer than any hotel she had ever booked herself, with clothes that appeared in her wardrobe without explanation, food that arrived 3 times a day like clockwork, and a door that was never locked but might as well have been. 'Cause outside that door was Seoul. And outside Seoul was a world that, according to Jeon Siwon, currently believed she was dead. He told her on the second morning. Quietly. Over coffee she hadn't asked for but had accepted because the alternative was sitting in silence with her own thoughts, and that was becoming increasingly unbearable. "Your firm has been notified," he said. "There was a report filed with the British Embassy 2 days after your disappearance. The official position right now is that you are missing. Possibly deceased." Ella stared at him. "And you didn't correct that?" "No. Because it protects me. Because it protects both of us," he said. "A missing woman draws a certain kind of attention. A dead one draws less." She wanted to be furious. She was furious. But underneath the fury was something she didn't want to look at directly. The uncomfortable truth that he was probably right. That whoever had taken her was still out there. That walking back into the open right now with no information and no protection was the fastest way to end up back in that concrete room. Or worse. So she stayed. And she watched him. And she tried to build a picture of Jeon Siwon from the fragments he left behind, because the man himself offered almost nothing voluntarily. What she learned slowly. He woke before everyone else. She knew because she heard him. Movement in the corridor at 5 in the morning, quiet and deliberate, like a man who had trained himself to take up as little space as possible even in his own building. He took his coffee black and he read physical newspapers, 3 of them Korean in an order that never changed. He spoke to his men with an economy of words that somehow communicated everything. They didn't fear him the way people fear cruelty. They feared him the way people fear precision, the knowledge that he never moved without reason and never spoke without meaning it. He was the most controlled person she had ever encountered. And control, Ella knew, was always hiding something. On the 3rd evening she found him standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the upper corridor, looking out at the city below. He hadn't heard her come up behind him, or he had and chose not to react, which felt more likely. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He didn't turn around. "You're going to regardless." She almost smiled. "Almost. The scar. Under your eye. How did you get it?" Was long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My father," he said finally. "Just that. Nothing else." Ella said nothing. She had learned already that silence was the only thing that ever made him continue. "He had a particular philosophy," Siwin said, still looking at the city. "That a man who has never been marked has never been tested. He was very committed to testing people." "That's not a philosophy," Ella said quietly. "That's abuse." He turned to look at her then. And something in his expression shifted, just slightly, just briefly, in a way she hadn't seen before. Not calculation. Not assessment. Something rawer than that. "You say things directly," he said. "It's a habit," she said. "People spend a lot of time decorating the truth. I find it exhausting." He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned back to the window. "The merger," he said. "Kwon Industries. Tell me exactly what you found in those files." Ella's pulse jumped. "How do you know about that?" "Because Kwon Industries," he said carefully, "has been laundering money through its offshore accounts for 3 years. And the company they have been laundering it for," he paused, "is mine." The silence that followed was enormous. Ella's mind moved fast. Too fast. Pieces clicking into place with the horrible efficiency of a woman who had spent years finding the thing hidden inside the numbers. "You didn't know about the merger," she said slowly. "Kwon was moving your money without your knowledge. Into a legitimate deal. So that if anyone ever looked, it would appear to be clean capital investment," Siwin finished. "Yes. And when I flagged the discrepancy, Kwon panicked. He needed the person who found it to disappear before the deal closed." He turned to face her fully now. "He didn't know who you were. He only knew your name and your flight details. Someone gave them to him." Ella felt it land like a stone in still water. Daniel. Her supervisor. Her mentor. The man who had fought for her to lead this deal. The man who was the only person she had told. "So I wasn't just a loose end," she said. Her voice was very quiet now. "I was a threat to both of you." "Yes," Siwin said. "And now?" He looked at her. Really looked at her. Not the calculating look, not the assessing look. Something more unguarded than anything she had seen from him. "Now," he said, "you are the only person who can help me bring Kwon down from the inside. Legally. Using the exact evidence you already found." Ella laughed. Came out sharp and a little broken. "You want the woman you're holding captive to help you. I want the woman who is the smartest person in this building," he said quietly, "to choose to help me." The difference in those 2 sentences hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for. If you have made it this far into this story, I know you are just as hooked as I am. Do me a quick favor. Drop a comment below and tell me, are you Team Ella or Team Siwin right now? And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that button and the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's keep going. 'Cause what happens next? Nobody sees it coming. He said yes. Not immediately. Not easily. She made him wait. 2 full hours, sitting alone in her room, staring at the city through the window the way he had stood staring at it the night before. Thinking. Calculating. Running every scenario the way she always did. Except this time the variables were not financial projections and market risks. They were her life. His world. And something unnamed and terrifying sitting quietly in the space between them. She came back out and found him exactly where she had left him. "I have conditions," she said. He nodded once. Like he expected nothing less. "I want full access to every financial document connected to Kwon Industries that you have. Every transaction record, every shell company, every name. If I'm building a case, it has to be airtight. Done. I want a secure line to contact someone I trust outside this building. Not my firm. Someone personal." Was. Then. Done. "And when this is over," she said, "when Kwon is finished and the evidence is handed to the right people, I walk out of here completely free. No conditions. No complications. No," she gestured vaguely at the building around them. "Whatever this is, following me." Siwin was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved across her face in that way he had. Reading, always reading. "You have my word," he said. "Your word," she repeated. "I don't know what your word is worth." "No," he said. "You don't. Not yet." That last part did something to her she refused to examine in the moment. She pushed it down and nodded and said, "Then we start tomorrow. Tonight I need to sleep." She turned to walk back to her room. "Ella." He stopped. He had not used her first name before. Not once in 3 days. It was always Lambert or nothing at all. Her name in his voice, quiet, deliberate, felt like something being decided. He turned. "Thank you," he said. Simply. Directly. Like a man who didn't say it often enough to make it easy. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was safe. Then she walked away. They worked. For 6 days they sat across from each other at a long table covered in documents, and Ella did what she did better than anyone alive. She dismantled Kwon Industries transaction by transaction, thread by thread, building an evidence architecture so precise and so devastating that even Siwin, who had seen the rough shape of Kwon's betrayal for months, went quiet when she laid it out in full. "This is more than laundering," she said on the 4th day, spreading 3 documents across the table and connecting them with the kind of focused energy she usually reserved for the final hours before a major deal closed. "He's been systematically siphoning from the legitimate side too. These subsidiaries," she pointed, "they exist entirely on paper. Kwon has been bleeding both sides. Your money and his investors' money. Simultaneously." Siwin leaned forward to look at where she was pointing. He was close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her. Could see the way his jaw tightened when he understood what he was looking at. "He was going to disappear," Siwin said. Low. Almost to himself. "After the merger closed. He was building an exit. With everyone else's money," Ella confirmed. Siwin straightened up slowly. There was something moving through his expression that was different from anything she had seen on his face before. Not fury exactly, something colder and more deliberate than fury. "How long would it have taken anyone else to find this?" he asked. "Someone good." Ella considered. 8 months. Maybe a year. "You found it in 3 weeks. I found the edge of it in 3 weeks," she corrected. "I found all of it in 4 days. With the right documents." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't the calculating look. It wasn't the guarded look. It was something more open than either of those. Something that looked unexpectedly, almost like wonder. "Who taught you to do this?" he asked. "Nobody," she said simply. "I taught myself. I had to." "Why?" She looked up at him. "Because I grew up in a world that was not built for me. And the only way to survive a world that wasn't built for you," she tapped the documents, "is to understand its architecture better than the people who built it." The room was very quiet. Siwin reached across the table, not for the documents. His hand covered hers. Just for a moment. Just briefly. Warm and steady and completely deliberate. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. In a man who measured every word, every movement, every breath, the gesture said everything that language would have cheapened. Ella looked down at his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. That night he brought dinner to the workroom himself. No staff. Just 2 plates and the quiet city outside the glass and a conversation that started about the case and drifted, slowly, somewhere else entirely. She learned that he had built the Jeon syndicate from the ruins of what his father had destroyed. That he had been 23 and completely alone and had decided, with the same cold precision he applied to everything, that he would never be powerless again. She told him about Lagos. About her mother's hands, rough from work and always warm. About the day she got her university acceptance letter and cried in the bathroom so her sisters wouldn't see because she was supposed to be the strong one. He listened the way people listen when they are genuinely hungry for what they're hearing. At some point the plates were forgotten. They were sitting on the floor. She didn't remember when that happened. Backs against the long couch, the documents spread around them, the city glittering 40 floors below like it had no idea what was happening inside this room. "You're not what I expected," Ella said quietly. "When I came through those doors. What did you expect?" "Worse," she admitted. Something moved across his face. "And now?" She looked at him. This close, this quiet, with his guard lower than she had ever seen it. He was devastating in a way that had nothing to do with how he looked and everything to do with who he was underneath the empire and the silence and the careful control. "Now I don't know what to do with you," she said honestly. He turned to face her fully. Their shoulders were touching. Had been touching for the last hour without either of them acknowledging it. "Ella," he said, very quietly. "Don't," she whispered. Not angry. Almost pleading. "I know," he said. And the fact that he understood exactly what she meant, that he didn't push, didn't take the moment further, just sat with her in the weight of it, was somehow more intimate than anything else could have been. She leaned her head back against the couch and closed her eyes. He stayed exactly where he was. Neither of them moved for a long time. And in that stillness, in that quiet, something settled between them, unspoken and fragile and real in a way that neither of their carefully controlled lives had prepared them for. Then her secure phone buzzed. She picked it up. A message from the one contact she had reached out to outside the building. Her closest friend. "Mara." 3 words. "Daniel is missing." Ella sat up slowly. The warmth of the moment evaporated completely. Siwin read her face. "What is it?" She turned the phone to show him. He looked at the message. Then at her. Something shifted behind his eyes. Sharp and immediate. "Kwon is moving faster than we thought," he said. "Daniel knows what I found," Ella said. "If Kwon gets to him before we do, he silences the only other person who can corroborate your evidence," Siwin finished. They looked at each other. Everything had just changed. They moved fast. Siwin made 3 calls in under 4 minutes. No raised voice. No panic. Just that same terrifying precision. Words landing like surgical cuts, each one producing immediate results on the other end. Ella watched him and understood, perhaps for the first time with her whole body and not just her mind, exactly what kind of man she was standing next to. Not dangerous the way the men who took her were dangerous. That was brute force. Blunt and ugly and stupid in the way that cruelty is always ultimately stupid. Siwin was dangerous the way a perfect equation is dangerous. Every variable accounted for. Every outcome anticipated. No wasted motion. No wasted breath. Within the hour they had Daniel's location. He was alive. Barely reachable. Hidden in a guest house on the outer edge of the city. Placed there, it turned out, not by Kwon's men but by his own panic. Daniel Osei had run. The moment he realized what he had put into motion, the moment he handed Ella's name and flight details to the wrong person. He had run and hidden and spent 11 days unable to live with what he had done. Ella sat with that for a long time. Siwin brought Daniel in quietly. Ella waited in the workroom. When Daniel walked through the door and saw her sitting there, alive, composed, eyes steady on him across the table, he stopped walking completely. He looked like a man seeing a ghost. 'Cause he was. Ella. His voice broke on her name. Sit down, Daniel, she said quietly. He sat. He was trembling. This man who had mentored her, championed her, pushed her into rooms she might not have found alone. He sat across from her and trembled and could not meet her eyes. I need you to tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. Every conversation. Every name. Every instruction you were given. All of it. Ella, I didn't know they would. Everything, Daniel. He told her. Took 2 hours. It was worse than she had imagined and somehow also more pathetic, because Daniel Osei had not betrayed her for power or ideology or even significant money. He had betrayed her because Kwon had found a debt. A private, desperate, foolish debt Daniel had accumulated 3 years earlier and hidden from everyone. A debt that had been quietly purchased and was now owned by people who knew exactly how to use it. He had handed her name over because he was afraid. Because he was cornered. Because he was human in all the worst ways humans sometimes are. When he finished talking, the room was very quiet. I'm sorry, Daniel said. Came out wrecked. Hollow with the knowledge that it was nowhere near enough. Ella looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the concrete room. The rope around her wrists. The 6 days of silence and unanswered questions. She thought about her mother pressing uniforms on nothing and what it had taken to build herself into someone who walked into $11 billion deals and won. She thought about how close she had come to never walking out of that building. I know, she said finally. I believe you. She slid a document across the table toward him. Now sign this. And then tell every single thing you just told me to the people I'm going to call. Because the only way either of us comes out of this clean is together. Daniel looked at the document. Looked at her. He picked up the pen. Kwon Industries collapsed in 17 days. The evidence Ella had built, airtight, devastating, documented to the last decimal point, was delivered simultaneously to 3 regulatory bodies across 2 countries. Daniel's testimony sealed what the documents alone might not have. The merger dissolved. The offshore accounts were frozen. Kwon himself was taken into custody on a Thursday morning, and Ella watched it happen on a news screen in the workroom where she had spent the last 2 weeks dismantling everything he had built. She felt less than she expected to. Relief, yes. A deep and bone-level exhaustion. But not triumph. The version of triumph she had imagined, clean and bright and fully satisfying, was more complicated in reality. Because the road to this moment had cost things she had not budgeted for. Trust. 50. A version of herself that believed the world operated by the rules she had spent her whole life mastering. That version was gone. She wasn't sure yet what had replaced her. Siwin found her on the roof that evening. She was standing at the edge, looking out at Seoul the way he had looked at it that first night, like someone trying to read a city that was determined to keep its secrets. He stood beside her, close but not touching, giving her the space she hadn't asked for but that he somehow always knew she needed. It's done, he said. I know, she said. They stood in silence for a moment. The city below them breathed and glittered and moved with complete indifference to everything that had just happened inside this building. Ella found that oddly comforting. The world continuing. Life insisting on itself. What happens now? She asked. She meant it practically. She meant the logistics, her return, her firm, her life that had been quietly declared over while she was busy surviving. But Siwin heard the other question inside it. The one she hadn't said directly. He turned to face her. That depends, he said quietly, on what you want to happen. Ella turned to look at him. This man who had caught her when she fell. Who had kept her safe in the most complicated possible way. Who had sat on a floor with her and listened to her talk about her mother's hands like it was the most important intelligence briefing he had ever received. Who had covered her hand with his and said nothing and somehow said everything. Who had held the full weight of her, not despite her sharpness and her stubbornness and her refusal to be managed, but because of it. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Then stay, he said. Until you do. Not a command. Not a plea. An offering. From a man who had spent his entire life building walls and had just, quietly, left one open. Ella Lambert, who calculated risk for a living, who had survived 6 days of captivity on nerve alone, who had dismantled an $11 billion fraud with nothing but her mind and her will, looked at Jeon Siwon in the Seoul evening light. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she stopped calculating. "Okay," she said softly. "Just that. Just, okay." And it was enough. Some connections don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with music or grand gestures or perfect timing. They arrive in the middle of chaos, in the middle of survival, in the middle of a moment when you have nothing left to perform and no energy left to pretend. And that stripped-back, accidental, completely unplanned truth of two people is the most dangerous thing in the world. Because once you have been seen that clearly, there is no going back to invisible. Ella Lambert went to Seoul to close a deal. She closed something else entirely. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Ella should have stayed, or walked away and protected her heart? Was Siwon's world ever going to be safe enough for a love like this to survive? And what would you have done in Ella's position? Trusted the man who kept you, or run the moment the doors opened? Drop your answers in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you even a little, share it with someone who loves a romance that earns its ending. Subscribe if you haven't already, hit the notification bell, and come back for the next episode, because the next story we have for you is going to hit even harder than this one. You have been an incredible audience. Until next time.